Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Candidate Forum for the election on March 28th. Welcome to those of you who have joined in the room. We have a nice crowd here. Welcome to everyone on Zoom. And welcome to those who are watching this live stream on Channel 9. In addition to all those options for today, we are also recording this, and I just wanted to remind you that this will be the League of Women Voters will be the producer and owner of its content, and if it's aired or posted or any way distributed, it can only be used in its entirety, and it may not be used in political campaign advertising. I'm Nancy Comfrey. I'm the chair of Voter Service Committee, and I'll be your host this afternoon. And we're also fortunate to have with us Lynn Brodsky. She is from the League of Women Voters Winchester, and she is a trained league moderator, and she has hosted or moderated several Concord and Carlisle forums in the past, including our previous select board election. So welcome, Lynn. Our forum this afternoon has two portions. The first portion, we're going to hear from Carrie Rankin running for school committee and Carmen Reese running for town moderator. These two races are uncontested and these are incumbents, but we thought that it's useful to hear from them and understand their roles, and so have them be able to represent what they do for our town. So we're grateful for them being here. The second portion, I'll see the podium, and Lynn will take over, and we'll have our two select board candidates, Carlin Reed and Mark Howell. Both portions will start with a 90-second introduction to the candidates, followed by questions prepared by the League of Women Voters, followed by audience questions. Audience questions in the room you can place on cards with the pencils that are provided. If you raise the card, someone will come and take it. On Zoom, you can put it in the chat and we'll get it off of that. Our timers are this afternoon are Diane Proctor and Tony Comfrey, and they will be sitting right in the center there. They will give a 15-second warning before the time is up, and then tell you when the time is. There will be 90 seconds for your openings and 2 minutes for all questions, for all question answers. So with that, I'd like to get started on our first portion. Welcome, Carrie and Carmen. I'm going to go back and forth. I'm going to start with you, Carmen. The first question is, we know from last year's forum that you're always thinking about ways to increase attendance at town meeting. Have you had any successes to date to tell us about? And do you have any new ideas to implement this year? Oh, I'm sorry, opening statements. Thank you, Diane. Carmen, please. Provide us with an opening statement.
Okay. I want to thank the League for this forum and Concord voters for electing me to 7 terms, one-year terms as moderator, and everybody who's here today at the forum. I'm now running for my 8th term as moderator. For the other elected offices, we have unofficial term limits that bring the benefit of fresh perspectives and broader participation in government, but at the cost of losing accumulated experience and at the cost of institutional memory. For the moderator, we don't have any of an unofficial term limit, and why not? Well, it's not a policy position. The accumulation of experience for the moderator is a little slower. It's an annual or biannual town meeting cycle. And voters have the annual opportunity to get rid of the moderator. So in the case of the moderator, the costs and the benefits are really reversed. The absence of term limits bring some accumulated experience and some institutional memory, but maybe at the cost of fresh perspectives and opportunity for others to serve. So my goal in my 8th term as moderator will be to maximize the upside of my continued service and to try to minimize the downside by being available to town officials, staff, citizen petitioners, voters, students, adapting our town meeting processes to better serve voters to the extent that I can, and seeking out a diverse set of viewpoints for the Finance Committee. Thank you.
Thanks. Carrie?
Thank you. I also want to echo Carmen. Thank you to the League for hosting this forum this morning or this afternoon, and thank you to everyone both here in person and online on television for paying attention. This is a great opportunity to have a really good conversation about all the important issues that we face as a community. So, thank you. My name is Carrie Rankin. I was elected a year ago to serve in a special election to serve on the school committee, and I'm now running for a full 3-year term for the school committee as well. So I have lived in Concord for about 10 years. My husband and I moved here prior to having children, and we moved here in large part because of the terrific reputation of the school system. We now have 3 children who are just about 4, 7, and 9. The older 2 attend Thoreau Elementary School, and this town has just been such a wonderful place for us as a family to raise our children, and I feel incredibly grateful and fortunate to be able to give back to this wonderful place on the school committee. I have learned an enormous amount about our schools, about our administration, about the town, and about this amazing community over the last year in this role. And I know we're going to dive into some of that over the next few minutes. But I just want to say I've seen that my role really is twofold. One is to be a real advocate for our students while making sure that we are not placing an undue burden on taxpayers. So it's a hard job, and I'm really fortunate to have it. So I look forward to talking about it more.
Thank you both. And now, Carmen. I gave you a little while to think about the answer to that question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, that's okay. I believe you asked whether I've undertaken any initiatives to increase voter participation in town meeting, and whether any of them have been successful, and whether I've got any new ones up my sleeve.
Exactly.
And I would say that we're really blessed to have great town staff. Things are hard right now because there are a lot of vacant positions and there's been a lot of turnover. But we have had wonderful communications people in the townhouse who have helped us with our website and the information that we get on the town meeting on the website. They have helped us with social media announcements, where I went to a PTG meeting and asked everybody how many of them read the Concord Journal. This was 2 years ago. Nobody. 0. And I realized, okay, there's got to be another way to reach these folks. And so where are they getting their news? They're looking at Facebook, they're looking at Twitter, they're looking at Instagram and so forth. And the town has accounts in all these places, and we make sure we get announcements in those places, and we make sure we get news and notices out. I'd like to renew my effort to go back and I think you have to go where the people are if you want to interest them. And where there are already gatherings are in the schools. That's where we have our largest gatherings. And I would love to talk with the PTGs again, now that we're kind of in a better place with COVID, to go back and talk with them about town meeting and about opportunities to serve on boards and committees, in particular the Finance Committee, which I'm responsible for appointing. And I will say that our website has been, in addition to my other hats, I'm also the president of the Massachusetts Moderators Association right now. And I know that many other people around the state look at our website as a model for information for town meeting. So I'm really proud of that, and proud of our town staff that's worked with me to do that.
Thank you. Carrie, what have you learned in your first year on the school committee, and how will you use that experience to influence your future engagement with the school committee?
Yeah, I've learned that it's a really big commitment. It's a lot of work. I mean, we are at a really unique moment in time. We are coming out of a global pandemic. We had a mental health crisis prior to COVID that has really only been exacerbated by the pandemic. We have growing needs for specialized education. We're working on building a new middle school. There's just an incredible amount of work that we're working on as a town and as a school committee. And I think one of the most exciting and important things is that we're really working on with urgency on realizing our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging goals. And I think all of that is happening at a moment of incredible economic uncertainty. So you take all of these really big challenges, and then you take the fact that there's inflation and economic uncertainty in families' homes. It's a really hard task. So I have learned just the depth that we are dealing with, the depth of challenges that we're dealing with as a community and a school district. And I've also learned, I think my biggest takeaway is that just how involved this community is in a wonderful way. It's not always everyone agreeing with one another. There's certainly conflict and discussion, and but this community shows up for its students and for their learning time and time again. So I have really enjoyed that dialogue. I've really enjoyed getting to know the various aspects of the town and community, and finding our way through this challenging moment.
Thank you. Carmen, can you help us understand your thinking about how articles in the town warrant and at town meeting are ordered?
So the order of the articles of the warrant is a decision by the Select Board. The Select Board is responsible for, with some very minor exceptions, it's really only the Select Board that has the authority to put articles on the warrant. The warrant under state law goes out under their hands, and they choose the order. The practice for many, many years has been for the moderator and the Select Board to consult on the order of articles in the warrant, and there have been many different things that have been thought about over time. One is, should zoning articles really go at the end, because they are so important to our lives in town. They really influence the shape of our town. And should they go last when people have gotten tired and want to go home? On the other hand, we had experience once where we had budgets on the second night, and I think the schools were very distressed that there were like not enough people there, and we had some issues with that budget, and we had specific requests from the schools to never do that again. And we try not to cluster all the citizen petitions in one place so that they're sprinkled throughout the warrant and perhaps thematically grouped with topics that they might go with, like, for example, energy or something like that, or telecommunications, or use of the outdoors. So that's some of the thinking that goes into it, and then it's the moderator's job to, after the close of hearings, to think about what goes on the consent calendar. And I always run that by the Select Board and consult with them on whether they think it's a good idea or a bad idea to include what I've suggested.
Thanks, Carmen. Carrie, another help us understand question. Can you help us understand how that blue form works for public comment at school committee meetings, and tell us what you think of it, that its use has on the impact on the community?
Sure. So to provide some context, when we have our school committee meetings at Ripley, if you would like to make a public comment, we have a blue form that you fill out. It says your name, your address, and like a brief topic of that you'd like to discuss. And there's a few reasons we do this. First of all, it's in our policies. It's written as our policy of how we engage with the community. This is a business meeting. It's not a meeting with the public. They are business meetings. But of course, we want the involvement of the public. So the purpose of the blue form is, there's a few reasons. One is it helps with the minutes. We are required to put who speaks, where they live. We need that information from people, so it just helps make sure that we get it correct in the record. And then the second is you have to just give like a very basic overview, topic that you hope to discuss. We, according to our policy, we allow 20 minutes for public comment at every meeting. If we have, 20 people in our meeting, 19 of them could be there to talk about the same topic, and one could be there to talk about something completely separate. So the blue sheet also allows us to make sure that there is some diversity in topics that we're hearing about. So that is our policy. We got away from that policy during COVID when everything was on Zoom. And now that we are fully back in person, we are trying to go back to our pre-COVID policies and formats and ways. And so now we're just abiding by our policy.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to turn to questions from the audience. I think everyone's going to be very disappointed that this portion is so short. Carmen first. Would you please comment on the length of the CMS discussion at the special town meeting in January? The call to question motion came while we were still waiting to speak.
Yeah. So it's really up to the meeting how long the meeting discusses an article. And a motion to call the question is a totally appropriate motion, and one of the reasons that we require a supermajority vote on that motion is to be sure that there's a supermajority of people who feel that they're done talking and they're ready to go to a vote. They've already made up their minds. And we had, by the time that motion came, I actually had thought we'd probably talk about it a little longer, but we'd been talking about it for 35 minutes when that motion came. If a motion comes sooner than that, if the first speaker gets up and says, I call the question, I'm going to ask that person to sit down and come back in a few minutes with that motion, please. Technically, I don't have the authority to refuse the motion, but I will ask that person to sit down, and most people will do that. So I learned a lesson in that meeting, and that is I have a very regular process of just going boom, 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 microphone, 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 which I do to try and be very predictable about where I'm going so people understand who I'm calling on. And then, after, okay, I got 3 microphones here, now we're going to go to the auditorium, now we're going to do 3 here. But in fact, there were a bunch of people at one microphone. And in retrospect, it would have been better to stay there for a couple of speakers because they were bunched. So that's a lesson that I learned in the last meeting.
Thank you. Carrie, can you tell us what specifically the schools are doing now for DEI that they were not doing before, diversity, equity, and inclusion that they were not doing before?
Yeah, this is a great question. So first of all, we have an excellent director of DEIB, which is a unique position. Not all school districts have this, and Andrew Nemichi, and he oversees all of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. And he has done a number of things. Number one, there's a lot of work done between the METCO program and then also with Andrew and their two together to get some really good feedback from, specifically at the high school level, from the students on what's going well, what's not going well. There were very in-depth, long conversations where they got some really good feedback about what they need. And one of the things was a dedicated space in the high school where students of color could gather. And so that has been implemented. There is a kind of an advisory group that has a direct line to Andrew. So this is students directly to Andrew to be providing ongoing feedback, ongoing regular communication between the schools and Andrew. We've also hired, we have now a METCO director for K through 8, and then we also have one at the high school that's new this year. There used to be one that was just K through 12. And then we're also looking next year to expand our METCO program. This is something that is not completely in our control, but typically there are access points where you're able to apply to be in Concord schools via the METCO program. And we're expanding it to, Dr. Hunter is setting a goal to have 10 METCO students in each grade, K through 5, starting next year. And that would really create a broader pipeline. When I say this is not completely in our control is because students have to also choose to come to Concord, and we are the furthest school district. So it is a big ask. A lot of kids, if they have the opportunity to go to, I have so much more to say, Diane, to Brookline or to one of the other school districts, they would choose that over an hour ride. But so that's a small sampling. There is an incredible amount going on in that space.
Thank you both. I'm so sorry that I'm going to have to ask you to do your closing statements, but I am going to perhaps give you a thought from another question that we had that you might want to include in your closing statement. I don't know. Now that the new middle school is underway, what's the next big issues for on the horizon? And you started first, Carmen, so Carrie, why don't you do your closing statement first?
Sure. Well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun, brief, but a lot of fun. So I will address that question. So the middle school, now the middle school, we're going to be breaking ground hopefully this spring. And I mean, there's a whole host of things that we want to be working on. I think personally, something that I care deeply about is mental health. I think that that's something that we're looking to schools to solve and to address in a way that we really never have before. And that's something that schools are taking on in real ways. Some school districts are looking at bringing on counselors. Others are looking at ramping up guidance programs. But these are things that our kids need. I mean, I think Dr. Hunter has said a number of times that if students aren't ready, aren't feeling emotionally well themselves, they're not going to be ready to show up to school. And I think that is just we have to be willing to address the realities of mental health. So that's something that I'm really interested in digging into in the next 3 years, among many other things that I both can plan for and be prepared for and will certainly surprise me. Thank you for this opportunity. Oh, I also just wanted to say that it's been really wonderful to share a stage with Carmen. She's so good at this job, and we are so fortunate to have her in this capacity. So thank you, Carmen.
You're here. Thank you. And Carmen.
Well, I'm not a policymaker, so I can't say much about what the next big issue is after the middle school, but I can say this. First, I am so grateful to the Concord Bridge. And we are so lucky I can't express my enough gratitude to the folks who worked so hard to put it together and are delivering it to every household. So it is magnificent to have that method of reaching our voters back, and I plan to make really good use of it going forward. Next big issues that are going to face town meeting, I think we're going to have increasing pressure statewide on how to use technology, and a lot of discussion about remote participation in town meeting. It's out there. So I don't think it's on the short horizon, but it's out there. And finally, I think, we've had, for the past 20 years, really, we've had a wonderful period of growth in town, and abundant surpluses, lots of free cash, and that is changing. And we are not that far away from facing Proposition 2.5 overrides, and when that happens, our processes will be a little more complicated at town meeting.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you both. It was wonderful to have you here, and it's my only sadness it was so short. We'll do a switch now. Mark Howell, Carlin Reed, please come up, and Lynn Rodsky will take over from here.
Do you want to get your cup of water? Yeah, so those are our candidates. Should I call them? I'll just ask.
Hi. My first name is fine, sure. I'm.
Oh, call me Carlin, please, by all means. No,
Thank you so
Lynn.
much.
Appreciate that. Mark, how's the sound check on this? Good? We're doing all right? Okay.
Okay. Hear me all right? A little closer. Okay.
Okay, so thank you for passing this on to me. I'm Lynn Brodsky from the League of Women Voters of Winchester. And so this is for the contested seat for Select Board with Mark Howell. It's Mark Howell, right? Mark Howell and Carlin Reed. And so for this portion of the forum, each candidate will answer each question asked. You will have 2 minutes to answer each question. And if you would like to comment on each other's responses, you have up to 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Our timers are sitting in the front row. We saw their signs there, and they will let you know when 15 seconds are remaining and then when you're done. And we'll start with the candidates' introductions, starting alphabetically by last name with Mr. Howell. And after the introduction, we'll alternate who starts first with each question.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for holding this forum, Carlin Reed for opening, for the opportunity for the discussion, and also to the citizens attending now or watching later. Thank you for taking the time to consider voting for me in this role. I've lived in Concord for 24 years with my wife Pam and 2 children who attended Thoreau, Sanborn, and CCHS. I'm an information technology professional. I worked for IBM for 32 years. I've served the town on the Finance Committee for 2 terms, including as clerk, as vice chair, and as chair. After IBM and the Finance Committee, I became Concord's first Chief Information Officer, joining the senior management team in 2011. And while in that role, I started the Concord Light broadband internet service using our fiber optic network. Since 2010, I've also served as the chairperson of the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force, which created a roadmap for further deployment of fiber in Concord. I'm seeking a seat on the Select Board because I want to continue to serve this community that's given me so much. Today, I hope you'll get a sense of my approach, my passion, and my experience for inclusive, cost-effective, and meeting community needs. Thank you again for taking the time to be here.
Thank you. And Carlin?
Thank you. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. That's how I enter my name into every single committee meeting that I've been watching for the last 5-some years. Very briefly, you folks will have a very difficult choice for a Select Board. Who's going to be the lucky person to join these fine people who currently serve the Select Board? I'm hoping that it will be me, because I think I'm the better candidate. Let's start there. Now, Mark is my neighbor. It's really strange in our neighborhoods right now. But we maintain a very civil approach to things, and I want to let you know that my background is very briefly stated on my website, carlinforconcord.com. It's also in the handout that's in the back of the room there. I'm an attorney. I'm celebrating my 40th year practicing law this coming May. I've lived in Concord for the last 14 years with my husband. We moved here for the schools so that my son could go to the high school at CCHS. And I've been a volunteer on town committees. I've been a volunteer poll worker, an election warden. I've worked with the League. I've also worked currently with the Cable TV Committee as its chair. So video is really important, and looking at seeing how good you all look on TV is also really good. So that's probably about enough for now. Let's get to the questions. I'm looking forward to that part.
Okay, Ann, Carlin, you get the first question, 2 minutes. Both of you have already contributed significantly to town government. What have been the most satisfying and the most challenging aspects of your town volunteer work to date?
Okay, volunteer work. The most satisfying so far has been watching how our local TV studio developed, how it transitioned from a nonprofit to a town department, because I've been part of that process every single step of the way. Minuteman Media Network has grown from an organization that was somewhat disorganized, not totally trustful at that time, to something that now is fairly well-staffed. It has an excellent station manager. It has good leadership within the town. And my committee, the PEG Access Advisory Committee, has been with them, helping guide them on creating policy, providing content for their TV stations. And we're right now in the process of negotiating the contract with Comcast for the town of Concord. I would say of any of the volunteer activities, that would be number one. A very close number two is creating the mail-in ballot process that our town uses now to mail in ballots. Through my work as an election warden with the clerk's office, I supervise the central tabulation facility, which counts all those mail-in ballots that came out. Roughly 40% of the ballots that were cast in the last elections were by mail. It was a very critical part, and I helped design the process. So those are my two most significant contributions
Okay.
so far.
Mark.
Thank you very
And
much.
if you need me to read the question, let me know.
Satisfying and challenging contributions.
Right.
Okay. Well, many of you know, as I outlined in my background, I've spent about half of my time as an employee and half of my time as a volunteer serving Concord. So I'm going to talk specifically about the experiences as a volunteer. And I would have to say that the thing that I found most satisfying was the most recent assignment on the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force. That effort was both interesting because it brought to fore some things that I didn't even realize I was actually doing when I was starting the broadband network in the first place. So we were able to uncover that, in fact, even though we were running a business, we were doing it carefully and prudently, we were actually overlooking a segment of our population. We were not delivering fiber optic service to the many portions of the community, and we were in some senses overlooking them, and those turn out to be the least costly and by inference potentially most needy sections of the community. And that was a learning that came even after the fact. So that committee was also a task force, which meant it was quick and worked fast, and it had diverse points of view on it. There were several different distinct rationales, and we had to bring that all together into a policy recommendation, which now the Select Board and other boards and committees have the opportunity to work on. So I found that particularly satisfying because of how much I learned, even though I'd been very close to something. The challenging part is the learning curve of the Finance Committee. During my 6 years on that, I just learned a ton about how things work in Concord, and I think that when you're on one of the major policy boards, that is what you will need to do, learn.
Okay, all right, thank you. And just a reminder that people in the audience at home and here, please do write your questions on cards or on the chat from home. So the next question, Mark, you're first. Do you think the town should prioritize taking measures to increase the capacity of our sewer and wastewater system to facilitate the building of more housing and other developments? If so, what steps would you propose the Select Board take?
Short answer is yes. Of course, the sewer capacity is limited by the permitting that the federal government is responsible for giving us, and I know that there are efforts in place to try to increase the level of the permitting. But I do think that it's important that we press for that because it does place a limit, particularly on the amount of activity that we can have in our town centers. Our town centers are extremely important to the economic vitality and therefore the economic diversity of our community. And so it's very important that we do, in fact, do that.
Okay, thank you. Carlin?
I would have to agree with Mark on this particular point. I think the infrastructure is very important to the growth of the town, but it also goes to the heart of a question that we each have, is how much do we want Concord to grow? Wastewater is a constraint. The treating capacity is something that we would need to invest in, and it also depends on how much we're able to afford at what time and what phase. So what I would do as far as taking steps is to talk with the experts in our town, with the Public Works Commission, and find out from them what would be a reasonable approach. Then I would go to FinCom and say, okay, can we afford it? And how quickly can we afford it? And with that information, I would seek to go forward with trying to get some more, trying to improve the infrastructure, to see if we need to have a second wastewater treating capacity location, if we need to encourage septic systems or encourage sewer extension lines for the town.
Okay, thank you. So Carlin, the next question goes to you first. As you know, following requests by the League and allied partner groups, the Select Board recently established the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission to research and act on ways to make Concord a welcoming community to a more diverse population. Do you support the town doing more in this area, such as adding an employee to the town government whose role it is to enhance DEI along the lines of the annual town meeting citizen petition article number 10?
Short answer is yes. Now, adding an employee is one of the warrant articles that we have facing the town, and the question is whether or not it's a citizen petition, whether the town meeting should ask the select board to encourage the town manager to expedite the hiring of full-time DEI director. That's a lot of steps in that point. We have a survey that's out right now on DEI issues. Those survey results have not yet been analyzed. We have a really good program coming up that the DEI Commission is sponsoring on March 22nd. If I get that date wrong, let me know. March 22nd at the Goodwin Forum at 5 p.m. to talk about what some of the issues that are happening in town, making Concord a more welcoming community and building a better community system. So overall, I would generally support it. Again, talk to the Finance Committee to see if we can afford it, talk to the town manager, because it's really the town manager's decision on adding employees. If they go too fast, though, if they add too many, that's when we pull the brakes and say, how about a part-time? How about someone who is a consultant right now? We'll see how this works out. But I've attended the DEI Commission meetings. I think it's a wonderful group of folks, and they are truly committed to their passion. So I support them.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Thank you. There's a couple of things about this. The citizen petition for the DEI position was actually not brought forward by the commission itself. And I was really encouraged to see that in the town manager's budget appropriation request, she has already committed $75,000 in next year's budget towards DEI initiatives in the community. And the commission itself is trying to work through how to use those funds. I look at the work that the DEI Commission is doing right now, somewhat analogous to the way the Energy Futures Task Force started out. There's a lot of important work that's being done here to understand where we are and where we need to go to actually set some goals. And I look forward to that commission actually developing a roadmap for the community that we can all understand, that we can work with, and go forward with, because there was a time when we didn't all necessarily sign up for the sustainability principles, but now that's something that we see pretty close to universal agreement on. I'd like to see DEI become that sort of an issue and resolve in that kind of way. So I'm encouraged that there's funding. Is it time to hire a person to do that work? Let's see.
Okay, thank you. The next question, Mark, you'll go first. As we saw in the recent special town meeting and election, there is strong concern about Concord's rising property taxes. Do you think the town, and specifically the Select Board, should be doing more to specifically help those struggling to pay higher property taxes, such as the Tax Relief Committee? If so, what more do you think should be done?
The idea that's out there that I'm most interested in now is the residential exception. I think the exemption. I think that looking at that provides an opportunity for some direct relief to a certain segment of the population. It's imperfect because it's based on the assessed value of property rather than something like income, so it doesn't necessarily get at the root of the problem, but it seems to be the most direct method that's available at this point. I think that being careful with our resources, looking for efficiencies and productivity, and really paying close attention to the growth of budgets, especially as inflation seems to be returning, is also an extremely important factor, and where the select board, working with the finance committee and the town manager over the budgets over the next couple of years, can have the most direct impact by trying to, as best we can, reduce the growth in expenditures.
Thank you. Carlin?
Rising property taxes. It's the question that I'm asked at every one of my coffees that I've had, at just about every organization I go to. I actually had a question about it today before this program started. How are we going to contain the rising property taxes, and how are we going to give relief to those who need some help? This is not a cheap town to live in. We're learning that. We know that. We're getting close, and I think we might hit it in about a year and a half to a tipping point where we're going to see our property tax bill rise so high that we're going to be saying, okay, can we really afford this new expense, that new expense, where before we would not have asked that question at all. I was watching the Hugh Cargill Trust committee meeting the other day, and they were talking about how generous folks in the town of Concord have been to donate extra funds to the Hugh Cargill Trust as well as to the Tax Relief Committee. More so to Hugh Cargill than to Tax Relief. So one thing that I would do is encourage those who can afford to help the Tax Relief Committee and that program to contribute funds to that effort, because that will help those who need some extra funding. But more importantly, I think going forward, and we're going to be relying on our Finance Committee quite heavily on this, telling us the difference between a want and a need, because we're not going to be able to get everything that we want going forward. And every time that we have a question about, can we afford this, something new? Can we afford a new FTE? Can we afford a new building, a new project? We've got to look about, all right, what's the impact on the property taxes? Now, intellectually, we know this, but we're going to have to take it to heart and actually do it.
Okay, thank you. So Carlin, you're first on the next question. Are you in favor of changing the agenda of the select board meetings so that public comment is allowed throughout the meeting rather than only at the end? Why or why not?
Are those the only two options? Because I have a third option.
You can answer the question.
Okay, good.
How you see fit.
I'd like more than one option. I also like to be creative, and I think depending on the particular item or items that are on the select board agenda will frame the answer. Currently, public comment is generally held towards the end, and you have to sit through 2.5 hours of meeting before you get your chance to talk about something that may or may not be that subject. But I actually heard a suggestion, and I have to thank Henry Dane for this, about having a public comment period near the beginning of the meeting. Now, the school committee does this, and it allows those people who came to talk about a particular thing to give their piece for whatever time limit. And I kind of like that idea, to have a public comment at the beginning as well as at the end, because at the beginning you get a chance to have those folks who sit in the audience come and say, okay, I'm here, I'm concerned about Hanscom, I'm concerned about what's going on with the DEI, I'm concerned about something. And then if they choose to stay at the meeting, they can leave. Having it at the end is good because it allows a reflection on what's been discussed through the meeting. Now, throughout, that I'm not so sure about. It depends, again, on the topic. You also need to realize that even the select board members have time constraints on their lives, and they don't want to spend the entire evening there, so they want to get through their meetings and through their agenda items. I would be more in favor of having some at the beginning and some at the end, rather than just scattered throughout.
Okay, and Mark?
Thank you. Handling public comments is one of the trickiest things about being the chair of any Concord meeting, whether it's a hearing, chairing the Finance Committee hearings. I have definitely experienced what happens when you have people who are very interested in making sure you hear them. That can be challenging. It's difficult because in some hearings or meetings there's a tendency to engage in a bit of back and forth, and in others that's clearly not appropriate. I think we need to work on finding ways to make sure that the dialogue is taking place. A couple of ideas I have in this area are more of the focus type meetings that the select board has started to have, and in particular meetings which are designed to be about dialogue and then trying to have that dialogue maybe separate from the more business-oriented meetings where we're going through consent calendars and approving minutes and things like that. Because it comes down to a couple of other things. Respect for the time of town staff, for example. We ask our town staff to show up to these meetings, and we try to give them a time certain when they're going to get a chance to do their presentation. And yes, it's nice that they can use electronic presentation materials and come in on Zoom and so forth, but it's still very difficult, I think, to know when your issue is going to be entertained and when you're going to have that opportunity to make your views known and also get the business done. So I would look for some flexibility in that. I do think it's absolutely important for, in certain kinds of topics, particularly in hearings, for there to be specific periods of time during meetings when public comments will be taken, not just at the end. The beginning is interesting, a timed period, and then maybe a supplemental period as well.
Okay, thank you. So now we've reached to the point where it's time to take audience questions, and you all have been sending them in, and your league member is going to give me the cards with these. Just one moment. Okay, this is a long one. Access to in-town affordable housing continues to be an important issue raised by current Concord citizens across age groups seeking to remain in Concord, those who would like to move to Concord, and by employers concerning about filling workforce needs. As a select board candidate, what kinds of affordable housing initiatives are you prepared to support? For example, which zoning changes allow apartment buildings, increased density in all areas? Affordable housing. And Mark, you are first.
Thank you. I'm generally in favor of higher density, particularly near the town centers and the transportation centers. Our biggest or our scarcest resource when it comes to housing turns out to be land in order to create that housing. When we build denser projects, larger projects, we have the opportunity to get more units for the same cost, or in other words, the unit cost is lower, and we have the opportunity to build those units more efficiently, potentially. So I think that there are multiple solutions for different portions of the town, but I think in the town centers we need to find ways to increase the density and build somewhat larger projects. Brookside Square is an excellent example of it's not an affordable housing project, but it is a project that I think has contributed positively to the housing situation. I'm also in favor, though, of the addition of accessory units in residential areas. I think we need to keep on exploring that. When we look at the effects of the pandemic, we see people wanting to age in place. We see extended families, multi-generation families wanting to live together. And so making sure that there are opportunities for cohabitation of that kind in the residential areas is another way to take pressure off of the housing situation.
Okay, thank you. Carlin?
Okay, you said the questions about affordable housing. You didn't specify whether that was affordable with a capital A or a regular A, affordable housing, did you? Okay.
Yeah, it was typed with a little a, but you should interpret the question how you want.
That's fine. But it's kind of important because you talk about affordable housing, which is a part of the state housing index, the SHI level, but we're also concerned about housing for folks who are not low income. The major effort that I would support for housing would be to follow the guidelines that have been set forth very carefully and very diligently by the housing groups through the housing production plan. That is an excellent roadmap on how to improve and how to support the housing inventory that we have here in town. The other effort that I would support is funding affordable housing with capital A. We do that now through articles at town meeting. We're trying to do it through legislation that will raise funds for it. That's probably two of the efforts that I would most likely, that the select board member would have the most impact on doing that. And to support the housing groups, let them do their job, but also keep in touch with them and see how they're progressing. And by housing groups, I mean not just the town committees, but all the other organizations. The League has a really good group called the Housing Issues Committee that is involved in this. There are some other groups as well that are involved in housing as well. So I would work with all the groups, not just a few of them, on finding out what's going on with housing.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, Carlin, you go first. What is your opinion on the Citizens for Ukraine marching at the Patriots' Day parade?
Oh, I love this question. This is a good one. They should. Now, I know I have another 1 minute and 25 seconds to go on in this answer, but let me tell you what happened. There was a meeting from the Public Celebrations and Ceremonies Committee that I attended, where there was a request by this organization to march. And that request was denied. And at that committee meeting, the committee very diligently created a set of criteria. But I have a problem with the criteria. And these criteria are announced in a very recent issue of the Concord Bridge. And that is a particular phrase that would exclude groups that march that have any political or commercial efforts that are engaged in any of those. Now, maybe it's just the lawyer in me, but when I see that you can't engage in any of those efforts, that's going to exclude just about every group in town that would want to do it. The literal language was too ambiguous. Now, in that respect, I think the particular group, the Ukraine group, should be allowed to march at the Patriots' Day Parade. And I'm actually hoping the town committee will reconsider its actions, though I'm not sure it will. There are going to be other groups that will want to march in the parade, that will support various activities. It's not easy being a committee member, I realize that, but you have to kind of understand that there are certain things that should happen that make sense, and that is one of the approaches that really does make sense for this particular year. Next year, we'll see what happens, but that is a circumstance that I think we could improve on.
Sorry, we just have to confer.
That's okay.
I could go ahead.
Okay, so
Sure.
sorry. We had a time thing. So Mark, I
Oh.
think you're next. No, wait, no, you both finished
So-
this.
Mark's next.
I was going to answer the Citizens for Ukraine
Okay,
question.
perfect,
Sure.
perfect, okay.
Okay. I also agree that it makes sense to me to allow a group that is based in Concord, local to Concord, consisting of citizens who have been here and at this for a full year to really express their opinions in our local parade. I recognize that we are on the eve and really fully engaged at this stage of the game in planning for Concord 250. That is a monumental endeavor, and we also need to be cognizant of the fact that that is going to attract attention, and there may be other groups that we may not immediately be so sympathetic to who may also then want to make applications. So I understand why the Public Ceremonies Committee needs to be somewhat careful about this, but to me, it passes the test. This is a local group of citizens, and they should be allowed to participate in our parade.
Okay, thank you. So with the and so this one, Mark, you'll go first for this one. With the anticipated forthcoming increase in citizens' taxes to build the new middle school, how can we address the ever-growing municipal budget needs for both known deferred projects and other identified new projects and service priorities? Where could we reduce spending to alleviate property tax increases?
Budgeting is extremely challenging, and at the select board level, the role is to help prioritize and focus what is actually implemented in the budget each year. It's the finance committee that sets the overall targets, but actually it's the select board who specifies the goals that the town manager is going to work on. I've worked inside the town government. I understand the town budget really as well as anybody. I contributed to it for 8 years in a row in 2 different areas, both within the light plant as the broadband manager and as the IT director. It is extremely difficult to extract a great deal from it, but you can still be focused year over year. 80% of our town budget goes directly to salaries. We talk about affordability as a manager, trying to recruit people to work for the town of Concord. It was extremely challenging to be competitive, especially in IT, especially in telecommunications, where there's broad commercial competition in those roles. So that said, though, when I worked on a budget, the first thing I look for is efficiency and productivity, and I use that as my way of trying to reduce the goals. If we have even one more year of budget growth that's similar to this year, we will have used our excess levy for under Prop 2.5, and we'll be right where Carmen suggested that we may be at town meeting, considering budgets that require overrides. And so that's a cause for real concern.
Okay, thank you. Carlin?
Where do we reduce spending? We had a question like this at the Concord Business Partnership not too long ago, only their focus was, where can we increase revenues? The other half of the question. I don't know the answer to either one, but I do know that we have a town manager who is really good at doing budgets for the town budget, for the municipal budget. And I think she's been doing a very good job, she and her staff, handling the town budgets and trying to figure out what is reasonable now, what can be deferred, what can be accelerated, and how to go find grants, how to look for opportunities for funding. So I would look at not just trying to reduce spending is the same, in my mind, as trying to tell people, no, you don't get what you want to have, but you can try and wait a little bit longer to get what you think you need. Reducing spending and increasing the revenues for potential revenues go hand in hand. But I think that, going back to an earlier comment, that in the next 2 years we're going to have some really hard questions about what we're going to be spending our money on. And every time we want to spend something, we've got to say, okay, what would we have to be willing to give up if we had to make a level budget rather than a level service budget?
Okay, well, as the moderator, I'm going to take a little moderator's prerogative here and ask both of you, first you, Carlin, and then Mark. You mentioned increasing revenues, so what would that look like?
Ooh, how do you increase revenues? Well, let's see. We have this wonderful celebration coming up called the Concord 250, coming up very soon. We will have 200,000 people, I think, Henry, that's what you've told us, will be coming here, maybe 1 million over the next year or so coming into this town. And I suspect that will be a revenue-generating opportunity in many respects, from not just from directly in the revenues from the hotels, but also the indirect revenues. That will be one opportunity that I think we should try to take advantage of to a reasonable degree. It's our reputation, but it's also our opportunity to add to our revenue base. That would be one place I'd look at right now, and I'll try to think of a couple others in a few moments. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure. Focusing on receipts is a good place to start, and that means focusing on the businesses that are operating in our town centers, making sure that some of the restaurants, for example, that have closed have an opportunity to reopen, because the restaurants, the local meals tax can be a significant contributor. It also builds up our capacity for the coming celebration. The hotel occupancy tax is something that is also useful, and so building up our tourism segment can help that. We're also working pretty hard already, but we need to continue to do this in the enterprise funds. For example, the Beatty Center, under Anna McEwen's leadership, is trying to get themselves back on a path to be able to contribute again to the general fund, which is important because with the COVID impacts, we've given them an opportunity to sort of relax that, but we need them to demonstrate that they can offer a profitable operation there. And broadband, which I would continue to build out, is another place where we can get more revenue than we spend. So we can focus on some of those enterprise activities and focus on increasing the options receipts to help stem the tide on budgets.
Lynn, could I do a rebuttal? 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
When we look at increasing revenues, we also need to look at necessarily who's going to be paying for those revenues. Will it be someone in town? Will it be someone out of town? Will it be a cross-subsidy from another organization? We can't just say, yes, we want to get more money from other folks. We have to figure out how that's going to impact our community and how it's going to impact our position within the entire region.
Do you want to rebuttal,
To be
Mark?
clear, I was talking about services that people value that are being offered at a competitive and really quite cost-effective way in these cases. And I think we just need to continue to build on those things.
Okay, do we have time for another question? Okay, yeah, so, okay, this will be the last question, and then we'll go to closing statements, and I think, Carlin, you'll go first on this. How do you anticipate managing disagreement among peers?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, let's see. I've been recently engaged in several disagreements with my peers, and you do it with grace, you do it with patience, and you don't do it with the gut reaction. What you do is think about the consequences of your words, the consequences of not saying the words, and then taking the appropriate step. That is probably the easiest way to avoid mishaps and misunderstandings. And that's what I would intend to do as a member of this select board if I am so graced as to be elected. Thank you.
Mark?
I'm known for being collaborative and being a good listener. And I think that the understanding where someone is coming from is the first step towards resolving any sort of differences of opinion or approach. I usually find that those people with whom I am under the impression that I may disagree with are the people that I can learn the most from, and that's an opportunity for learning. Whenever there's a disagreement, I look to learn something. So I find that when you're encountering citizens, there's either people that have a need for information, and so it's a role of the select board to provide that information, but there's also quite a few people who are extremely expert in many, many fields in Concord, and so we can be on the receiving end of that, and I'm always thinking about which way that information is flowing, and both ways are useful.
Okay, thank you. So we're at the point of closing statements now, and I think, Mark, you were first with the opening statements, so Carlin, you are first with the closing statement. I believe it's 90 seconds.
Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate that. And thank you all of those who came in person and online to this committee, to this particular proceeding, and who will be watching it on the video later on. Again, I'm Carlin Reed. I'm running for Select Board. We have 2 people running for 1 seat, and just want to let you know that I've been advocating for Concord for several years. I have honored Concord for several years, and I've been serving Concord and will continue to serve in whatever capacity possible, preferably with my fellow Select Board members. Thank you.
Mark?
Thanks to the League and Carlin and the citizens of Concord for this event today. This room has rarely ever looked nicer, I have to say. Today, I hope you've been able to get a sense of my knowledge and approach. As a department head, I work to achieve measurable, targeted results within the available resources, and I'll take a similar approach when setting policy. I have a deep respect for town governance, and I will promote the citizens prioritizing goals that reflect our shared values. Conversations among citizens, as I was just referring to, are the greatest way to make progress in multiple areas at the same time with limited resources. I will work to make citizen participation more efficient and broader. We need it, and it needs to be easier to do. I hope to support the town staff with adequate resources and work in conjunction with the town manager to set the goals that they will achieve. People are important to me. Town staff, residents, businesses, not-for-profit institutions, non-resident workers, and visitors are all stakeholders in our community. I was proud to be a member of the town staff, and I wish to express my sincere admiration for their dedication and support. Like many residents, I am concerned about affordability, climate change, and the environment.
Okay, thank you. So this is the end of our select board debate, and I will return the floor to Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, everybody. First, a thank you to the candidates for showing up and giving us your thoughts, and mostly, though, for running for town government and serving in town government. We very much appreciate you doing that. I want to thank Minuteman Media for helping us out again so ably so that we're able to do this by Zoom, on a cable channel, and in person flawlessly. Thank you. The League, as you probably know, is an organization that has a history of over 100 years of informed, active participation in government, including forums like this. If you are not already a member, there are forms in the back. Please join us. And I wanted to remind people, I think it was brought up today, but the DEI Commission has a survey available for, and they're really looking for input from the town on what our thoughts are and our experiences have been. So can someone tell me how people should access that survey? We have it on the Monday Member News every week, so that's how I got to it, but I'm not sure if you're not a member. Anybody know how? I'm assuming through the website, the town website.
The town website has the town DEI survey. Yeah, it's available under the DEI Commission page at the town website.
Okay, there you go. Let's see, I think with that, that concludes our forum. We have refreshments here. Don't forget to vote, and see you at the next forum.
Thank you.